do you see any potential positive future in the role of AI and potentially proletarianizing the PMC?
My hatred of AI is that people are generally functionally illiterate already, and it's like creating a decline in cognitive ability. And I see it with my students.
Yeah.
That to me is the major misuse, and it's scary. It's scary what it can do to our abilities to think in a complex way and write in a complex way. I was actually thinking about this the other day because they were on NPR, their National Public Radio, they were doing sort of roll call about white collar layoffs. All these big companies like JP Morgan Chase, Meta, Google, probably laid off them. And I was like wondering, so like 18,000 here, 36,000 there. It's still not like up in the millions, but what are these people going to have a come to Jesus moment? What is the potential? What is the revolutionary potential of those laid off people? Is there one? Because they've all done all these great things. A lot of people come to me are software engineers, electrical engineers, like people in the higher level PMC jobs who see the system for what it is and are trapped in it. But what happens when the system like actually spits you out? Like you're alienated from work, but then it tells you like you don't even have a job anymore. It's a really good question. You know, Occupy Wall Street was a shit show. That was also like yuppies in decline. And they were all like anarcho-communists. But maybe this new generation will be different. I don't know. It's a really good question.
You're listening to One Dime Radio. Become a patron at patreon.com/onedime to support the show and get access to extra content.
We think that ideology is something blurring, confusing our straight view. Ideology should be glasses which distort our view. And the critique of ideology should be the opposite. Like you take off the glasses so that you can finally see the way things really are.
When you talk about a revolution, most people think violence, without realizing that the real content of any kind of revolutionary thrust lies in the principles and the goals that you're striving for, not in the way you reach them.
Philosophers call someone a relativist, by which they mean it's a person that holds that any view is as good as any other view. My simple response to that is this. No one holds that view. No one believes that every view is as good as every other view.
Welcome to One Dime Radio. Today I'm here with a very special guest, Professor Catherine Liu. One of the best episodes that I did, a lot of fun. Today we're going to talk about what we didn't cover in the previous episode. We covered one of your most famous book, which is Virtue Hoarders. Talked about the professional managerial class, why the left's out of touch. In this episode, we're going to talk about the state of the left today and your upcoming book on trauma culture. Before I ask you what your beef with trauma is, why we're all traumatized, I want to start off with something a little more positive.
Okay.
Or maybe, depending on what you think of it. Zohran Mamdani.
Oh, yeah. I think net positive. I hate the haters who, I think at this point, there's like a left ecology that just lives online and they want clout. And so if they say really radical, edgelordy things, they get more engagement. So I think we should take the win and learn from the losses. But I think it's also, I want to be cautious about what it means in the long run or what it means in other places in the United States. But I do think that we need a cross-class, cross-ethnicity, cross-gender coalition, and he built it in New York City. Everyone's like, oh, it's very special, blah, blah, blah. But people of your generation turned out. Normally in a mayoral election, I saw this number, only 11% of people between 18 and 29 turn out to vote. And Zohran may have won because he turned out 41%, which is still under 50% of young people who have the right to vote who voted. But the fact that they did that is incredible. The fact that he motivated people, because actually, I think the duopoly wants to disgust young people so much that you turn away from any kind of politics and you just pursue self-interest or hedonistic, dead-end, antisocial things. So that was incredible. That was great. I also think the Israel-Palestine issue he took a strong stand on, and it really stood him in good stead in a city that has like a large population of Jewish Americans. So that was really astonishing. And cross-ethnic coalition there are so many immigrant groups in the United States, but in New York and in Queens, especially where it comes from. So I'm incredibly happy about that. I think it's going to be very hard to govern, but I think he's fairly unflappable, and he's proven himself to be ruthless and cheerful. And that's what we need. I aspire to that.
hmm You've been very critical of past progressive, even leftist politicians like AOC, the Squad. What do you think Zoran did right? Because I feel like a lot of people are happy, and I was very happy he won. I don't really expect that much in terms of
Mhm.
what a mayor can really do. So it's not like, people say he didn't take the correct anti-imperialist line. I mean, I don't expect much out of a mayor, but I do see it has lessons when it comes to campaigning, that's for sure. But I'm afraid that some people who are celebrating it might not take the right lessons, because I see some people say, "I was, like, happy when he won," and then I saw these people saying, "Woke is back, woke is back." What do you think Zoran did well that leftists should learn from?
I think Zoran learned from the Sanders campaign and AOC and the Squad. So each iteration of leftist candidate is learning how to handle certain things, and he was also uniquely positioned as an immigrant, actually, to speak to certain issues with a certain kind of like restraint, but also unflappability. Number one, during the Bernie Sanders campaign, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a campaign event where two young African American women yelled at Bernie about reparations.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Bernie didn't respond. He didn't speak. It was really bizarre. I could see that he was just so nonplussed by what was going on. He he's not of a generation of people who can respond to this kind of performative politics. And Zoran is, actually. And he would smile, he would laugh, like when people asked him equally provocative questions, like the African American women who were put up by the DNC to provoke Sanders asked him about reparations. And he refused to answer, like, yes. They didn't ask any other Democratic presidential candidate about reparations. They were targeting him, and he looked flustered. But when Zoran was asked, we should call him Mamdani. I don't know what like we're on first name basis with him. Would you go to Israel during the debate, right? During the mayoral debate? And Adams and Cuomo were like, yes, we're going to Tel Aviv, the first country I'm visiting. And Zoran just said, I'm not going to travel much because my job is mayor of New York and I will be in New York. Like he was kind of savvier than than Sanders was, bless his heart, in dealing with these kinds of provocations and what we would call like spin or something like that. The other thing that I think he saw, and this was a mistake that I don't think AOC can walk back, or Cori Bush can walk back. Cori Bush was voted out. She's running again. But I think it was it 2021 or 2022, year two Biden, when Nancy Pelosi posted on Mother's Day, Happy Birthday, People's Day. And Cori Bush and AOC posted that as well. I'm hoping that Zoran does not feel like he has to be an edgelord on these topics. There was no effing reason for them to do that. other than some kind of like NGO-led initiative from some rich donor who wanted to teach everyone a lesson in America about how there might be 0.00001% of the population who might identify as a man and be pregnant, and we can't call women mothers anymore on Mother's Day. None of these things people forget. They go into your unconscious and they're there simmering, and the right is there ready to like add electricity to it and inflame people's senses of outrage. I think he's learned to be much more common sense about just these are purely like PR gotcha things that people will get you on, or NGO type far-fetched initiatives that people will try to get you on. And I think he's learned his lesson from certain kinds of edgelordy things that are all incubated in NGOs, like abolish the police, which he's backtracked on and was like, oh my God, he's so awful, blah, blah, blah. So got Jennifer Titian that thing. When every single poll, every single sociological study has shown that working class people, and especially working class people in dangerous crime-ridden communities, they don't sign on to abolish the police. It's like people at Santa Cruz and UC Davis and San Francisco and certain, fringe parts of Oakland and, Seattle and Portland and, certain of my colleagues too, who are very comfy with, very good salaries, who are, staking their claim on abolish the police. He's not doing that. And he's not being held hostage by what centrists call like the left. I would just call them like in COINTELPRO radical fringe types, wreckers.
The loony left.
Yeah,
The
I don't
loony
even know.
left.
Wreckers might be good, like wreckers. Some of them are sincere, some of them are paid agents. Anyway, so I think that the other thing that is really powerful, and this was powerful for the Bernie campaign too, was that a campaign that has this much success, and even Bernie's two campaigns where he lost, it brings people together and it makes public certain kinds of statements about public goods, about socialism, about rent control, like socialism as rent control and housing and things like that. And all of that is a net positive. I think that for years, like decades, I would say, I had these core beliefs and I didn't feel like I could express them because I thought I was like a fringe person, because I was in academia. I was a fringe person in terms of having like non-identitarian materialist investments. And I worked in sort of left historiography. I tried to like get all my ducks in a row, be non-dogmatic, but prove certain things about the suppression of class in cultural populism. And it was really the Bernie campaign number one, 2016, when it was so empowering for me to see that public acclamation. And it made me much more bold in my own work as well. So I think that there is going to be like lasting positive effects from this, even if Mamdani, as mayor of New York, is very limited with regard to actual concrete policies that he can put into place. But already with rent control, with understanding like that billionaires in New York City exploit the city's class structure to enjoy like obscene levels of wealth, that consciousness is really important for New York City. It's a city where I grew up around, then I went to graduate school there. I worked for a long time there. Last year, I spent a lot of time there because my parents were both very ill and they both passed away. My father actually passed away in Queens. I spent a lot of time in Queens. My family immigrated to Queens at the time. And there's something about New York City that is peculiar to the United States, just in terms of the ways in which even the very wealthy have to live side by side with the working class. It's not suburban in that way. I mean, you can skate on the surface, never go into the subway, but there's the visibility of working class people and their struggle is much more prominent in New York. And it's not.
The subways.
Yeah. The subways are in a horrific state.
You can't avoid seeing the reality of class in New York.
Yeah. And one of the things it's not, and you know what, it's not something that would make like a liberal guilty or anything. I mean, maybe liberals feel guilty. They're just fucked up people. But when you're in the subway and you see like people commuting to work, like people in their high-vis vests, policemen, construction workers, service people, nurses, nannies, people of all different races, like you just have a sense of a city at work, of people struggling to have dignity, sharing this space. And there's a kind of solidarity there that's just about like taking public transportation, actually, and being thrown together like that. Of course, if you take Uber all the time and have matcha lattes, you won't see this, but the visibility, the New York City tries to be class segregated, but it's not successful just because it's so dense. And the level and the ways in which Zohran talked about the struggles of ordinary New Yorkers, including the taxi cab drivers, most of whom are South Asian or Asian American, is what was really moving to me. Like he was right there with them during their strikes, during the protests about the medallion debts, during the hunger strike by that Chinese American guy, Richard Tang, I think. I mean, it was reminiscent of a kind of romantic figure that we have in America, which we haven't seen in a really long time. And maybe we'll be betrayed by them. Maybe, this is just a dream or an illusion. But there were types of figures like Bernie Sanders, like JFK, like RFK Jr., who seemed to be able to like feel the struggle of ordinary people and the poverty of people. Before RFK Jr. was assassinated in 1968, he had, gone on the tour of Mississippi where he spoke in press conferences about children, African-American children in Mississippi with distended bellies, distended from malnutrition. And he said, how can we live in a country like this? When Zohran talked about the taxi cab drivers with $500,000 of medallion debt, working 12 hours a day at 70 to try to pay off this debt so that it didn't pass it on to their children, there was just something very, very like real and intense and honest about that. And so every time people tried to like get him on the woke stuff, he pivoted to the struggles of ordinary people. And I think that's a great formula. Is it enough? Or for the edgelords, like, are we going to get to a Leninist revolution? Maybe not. But I think the left has to produce some good things for people because people are really suffering in this country.
Yeah, I think actually that Kennedy comparison's kind of apt because that is how I would view Zoran to some extent, which is for today's low standards, like given how far the Democrats have fallen, he
Yeah.
is such an improvement, right? And
Yeah.
part of me, when it doesn't like that what his policies are called, he calls it democratic socialist. I'm sure he is a democratic socialist in his heart. Might even be more than that.
Right.
But his policies are really standard policies that you would see in like Quebec, for example, or Montreal, which are, they're not really socialist. It's like Rockefeller Republican policies like childcare or rent freeze. Like it's not radical. But the other part of me thinks I kind of like that he might, I hope, normalize the word socialism. Like when they keep using this scare tactic about socialism, it's going to be so crazy. You're going to be like Venezuela. And turns out he just governs New York City decently well.
Right.
Then maybe that could make it less scary. Kind of like how I think, honestly, the left's tactic of calling everything fascist, I feel like backfires because they called Trump fascist all the time. And now you have actual fascists on the right that are getting mainstream. Like,
Okay.
yep. So it's now we're seeing like, oh, okay, what we had before, but this is very different. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think it could normalize socialism perhaps in a way that Bernie Sanders kind of did, like it made it less.
He started it. Yep. I
Yeah.
mean, this country's anti-communist campaigns since World War II have been so crippling and corrupting. From McCarthy to Roy Cohn to J. Edgar Hoover, like the American democracy and American imperialism can't really coexist. And American anti-communism destroyed American democracy during the Cold War, or destroyed many of the institutions that, prided themselves on a kind of representative function because you had to wage the secret Cold War against communists. And I think that, part of the fear of the generation of my parents and that they passed on to me was like, they were always like, don't talk politics, because someone is going to come to get you. And my parents took us to China as kids, like right after Nixon went to China, because my father hadn't seen his family in many, many years, 30 years or so. And the CIA, the FBI came to visit our house. And they were like, Mr. Liu, is there anything you want to talk to us about this? Why did you make this trip? Like, there was real fear. I was little. I couldn't, like, I knew something was going on, like some things weird was going on because white people didn't really come to our house ever.
So they think you're like conspiring with the Mao Zedong or something?
Well, I think it was like, there were just very few people who went to China, right? Yeah. And, I wouldn't have surprised. I mean, my father said this later in life, but he worked at the UN too. And he said that he was constantly being like asked by people to report on what was going on in China. Like it could have been an inspection. It could have been an attempt to get information and create a source.
The people who criticized Zoran, so like I'm also in some sense critical, but the more I saw parts of the loony left critique Zoran, the more I wanted to defend him because he used to have tendencies that I would be very critical of on the left, like the kind of abolish the police.
Zoran,
Zoran, yeah, abolish the police, that kind of stuff, and God, I'm really glad that out of all the things he abandoned, that's a great thing to abandon because if he even tried to defund the police when being mayor, like if he's assuming he would get elected on that still, I feel like we would get like Rudy Giuliani come back from the dead and he
Can
was
you imagine like any crime that was committed under Zoran would be like an excuse for Donald Trump to send in the National Guard? The authoritarian reaction against that would have been so intense. And he's gotten a lot of flack for keeping Jessica Tisch as head of the new NYPD. But from all my insider political friends, and it was like, she's daughter the Tisch family, and they gave millions of dollars to Cuomo. It's horrible. She's a billionaire heiress. From my insider sources and New York government, they say that she runs a really good department, and she's a good technocrat. And that's a really hard department to run. So I think it was really smart to keep her on through the transition, because actually New Yorkers think she's doing a good job. Crime has gone down. The subways are in bad stages because of infrastructure stuff. But it's like what the normal average person are not like you and me. They're not involved in politics. They want to put food on the table. They want to pay their rent. They want certain things to work. And in the United States right now, like that's asking a lot. Like people during the government shutdown could barely put food on the table. There are a lot of institutional structures that are just not working right now because private equity, big tech have just gobbled up every legitimate part of the American economy. So to even have like the vibrancy of New York life, like Queens and places like that, are sustained by immigrant commerce because immigrants don't use Amazon so much. If you go out into the suburbs now, into wealthier areas, the malls are either like super high end or they're like devastated box stores because e-commerce has just destroyed local street commerce. But there's this kind of like lively market-based, like small M mercantile capitalism working in New York City that is just very precious to me. I'll tell you something, even by the standards of capitalism itself, American markets are just they're not free.
Yeah, small capitalism, well, is not really capitalism. That's just markets that existed much before capitalism.
That's right.
Yeah,
And you know what? It still exists.
Didn't oppose
That's
markets.
Right. That's right. And they still exist in these immigrant enclaves. And, I'm sure there's like a lot of black market stuff going on here, but somehow like those guys get the fresh fruit on their trucks every morning and they're selling pretzels and hot dogs and carts. And it's just, the city is alive in a way that a lot of parts of the American economy are not.
But what I probably like best is he was able to appeal to immigrants without doing the annoying, forced, you know, well, he did do identity politics, just not in the kind of forced focus group demographic research way. He did it in a very authentic way.
It was very organic. It was very funny. It was like, yeah, and there was and also he's young. So there's like a kind of like wink, wink social media thing. Like, hey, I'm rapping in a halal stand. I thought it was genius. I thought all of those things was just genius. It was I don't think there's an evil inherent in being online so much. I mean, a lot of us are. I'm probably more so than my colleagues. But can you engage with it creatively and authentically without letting it consume you? Like without becoming a plastic surgeon victim because you're like, oh my God, I gotta look like those girls, or oh my God, I gotta work out all the time so I can be swole like these guys. Like he was able to like make it fun, which is kind of amazing actually. So yeah, and he owned Cuomo and Adams in a very fun way, in a very funny and political way. But the question of Israel and Palestine, he was always very serious about, and he never backed down on.
Mm-hmm.
So he was the right man in the right time. I think there are a lot of young people who see this example and who can see themselves in his role. Like there was that guy, David Hogg, who I really did not like. He was one of the survivors of the Parkland shooting, and he was grooming himself to be a Democratic successor. The Parkland shooting was so horrible. And then right after he, came out and made really impassioned anti-gun speeches, Harvard let him in like at the last minute. And then when he graduated, he tried to run for office within the Democratic Party. And like, I don't know, who was it? Like Hakeem Jeffries or the guys who were running the Democratic Party, like they rat-fucked him. And he was like 25. And he's radicalized now. I mean, I wouldn't say he's someone I would support like with money or time or anything, but he's been transformed. And I think seeing Zohran succeed on the left is going to push him away from that repeating the DNC lines about, we need country control, and we need we need to have like carceral democracy again with uncarceral feminism and everything else. I think he's moved himself away from that centrism. And I'm not, I have zero hope that the Democratic Party can reform, but I think that younger people can move out of it in a different way. Thank God.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you another thing is that the real DNC types, the big donors, they have not learned their lesson. They are just as hateful as they were yesterday. Like I keep thinking like, are they going to wake up and go, oh my God, we can't have Chuck Schumer run the party, or, this was really bad. Like, how could we have let Cuomo run as a Democrat in this thing? Like something so corrupt, we got to change our politics. They are just as deluded and evil as they ever were. So,
yeah, I hope I have less hope in the establishment Democrats, and insofar as they do come around to Zohran, like some of them kind of have. It's in a very opportunist way.
Who?
Hillary Clinton and Obama.
What? Oh, Obama, right. I remember
Bill
that.
Kristol, of all people, the Trotskyist turned neoconservative, that guy, the George W. Bush guy, who turned liberal again. Then now he's
what? He's a Zohran spear?
Yeah,
no way.
I think it's like they see where the wind is blowing. That's how I see it.
Right.
Like,
well, Steve Bannon called him a genius. Did you see that? And if we are to believe the New York Times that Steve Bannon is really a leftist, then Steve Bannon just wants to have a cadre of leaders, like a small disciplined cadre of leaders that can change the direction of the country. So Zoran's just someone who can do that.
It's like that's kind of almost a compliment. It's like when they called you a Tucker Carlson leftist.
It's like,
Part of the Tucker Carlson left. I'm like, well, I mean, it's a strange comment, but it's
I'm
like
like, I
we
wish I
do
had
need a
Tucker's
Tucker
audience.
Carlson or
I
left.
wish I had Tucker's audience. Give me, give me $1 million and I'll put up a TV show, a daily show. I'll quit my job. I'll quit my day job. I'll just do this. Yeah. Yeah. There, all those insults and all that nastiness that came from the rad libs and the woke left, they're still there, like still ready to jump on people like Vivek and me. But there's another adversary now, which I think is actually kind of like today. I think it's funny. There are a couple of days when I'm like, oh my God, I got to get out of this country so I can say what I really think. When one of the Florida congressmen said that we should strip Zoran of his American citizenship, I was like, okay, well, if that happens, I need to get a go bag because I'm a naturalized citizen. And I was like, this could happen. Like all of these things we thought couldn't happen could happen. But now that he's won, I think that that's less likely. And I want to be brave, but I also want to have I want to have a plan B because there are actually a lot of things that I want to say and do. We need to create small enclaves, dark forests where we can really be free in our exchange of ideas.
Is that because of the censorship in the Trump administration, or also the self-censorship in the left?
It's coming from both sides. Yeah. There's, the threat of the state, which is using citizenship as a threat and ICE. And I don't want to put myself in any position in any way close to being vulnerable like a working class immigrant, but I'm a naturalized citizen. I'm very vocal about my political views. And then there's the crazies on the loony left that we've talked about. And they may be out of power now, the moment, but I just see them doubling down on their politics. They're still into anarcho-communism, whatever that is. And if you criticize them for being anarcho-communists, some of those people were the nastiest people to me when the book came out. And I really swear, I swear to God, I think they were 15 years old. But then I realized Malcolm Harris is also really into anarcho-communism. Do you know one of the worst episodes for me, which I think was just insane. And it happened this way. This was 2022. We were just coming out of the pandemic, 2021, 2022. I was in London. I thought I thought I could go to my son's graduation. He's graduated from college and it was still COVID and the whole thing was canceled. But I was in London and I decided to go to Marx's grave, right, in Highgate Cemetery. And I took the bus there. I was like, I'm going to take the bus, going to take my time. I'm going to go up there. And Tony, I don't know what got into me, but I was on my phone and there were all these people talking about mutual aid. And I was like, mutual aid is not politics. It's charity. It's not redistributive. It's just moving goods around. And I would have said much more. Today, I'll just say it's actually being social, being friendly, being part of your community before it was branded by anarcho-communists as mutual aid. It's not politics. And people went nuts. And I got to Marx's cemetery. I met Leo and a bunch of his friends there. We read from some Marx. We paid tribute, went to the pub, had a drink, and then I opened my phone, and it was every angry person in Portland and the crazy fringe of DSA were just jumping on me. And actually, that was not as bad as the trans thing because this was the second time already. And I don't say that anymore. I don't type it up, but I still deeply believe it. I still deeply believe. That was in 2021. Virtual Horders had just come out. So I was getting a lot of attention and everything. And, I was stupid. I thought I was debating X or maybe it was Twitter then still it's the public forum. And I had just heard this story from a friend of mine who had talked about these organizers who had brought unionized hotel workers to a DSA meeting before the lockdown. This was in the lockdown, right? And I was like, so what happened? And she goes, well, we brought these women in and everyone introduced themselves and each other and they were saying their pronouns and it was taking forever. And the women left. And so I wrote, and I have an aunt doesn't speak very much English. She worked as a union member at the Four Seasons Hotel in New York. She loves her union. She has great benefits. She had great job benefits during the pandemic. She can take English lessons. She does computer lessons, but she's just never really learned English. And she has a great network of friends over there. And I just imagined her like going to a meeting after being on your feet for like 8 to 10 hours a day. And she's like not young anymore. And like all these young people are going around saying their pronouns. And she thinks, and I would just find this so alienating from her point of view, because she thinks like, is this an English test? Like in Chinese, the pronouns don't have any change. So I could just see her leaving, right? So I was like, if we want to bring in the working class and this kind of, and Unite Here Now, which are all immigrant, Asian Americans mostly, and Latinos, like maybe not start with the pronoun ritual. And then people went nuts on me. They were like, you're such a transphobe. You want people to die. You should take a Xanny and you should take a bottle of Xanny and white wine and kill yourself. What else? I thought you were smart. Now I realize what a pig you are. And then the level of misogyny was just like off the charts. But the thing that struck me the most was like, there were people who would say like, I'm a truck driver, and that's so insulting to say about working class people. They're not transphobic. I'm transgender, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, it seems like this culture is so toxic. Like, I literally was trying to figure out how we can get over 100,000 members of DSA, because that was the big challenge at that time. That was my thought. That was literally the thought in my mind.
Mm.
If let's break 100,000, you know what I did? I quit DSA after that.
Yeah, that urban monoculture, and people. That's the thing. It's something you would associate with liberals, right? But it bleeds into the left a lot.
But
And
they were liberals. Now DSA is cool because Zohran came out of there or something. But I mean, at that moment, there was like a fanaticism about identity politics that,
yeah.
and oh yeah, I called it the pronoun ritual.
Mm-hmm. AOC at least took her pronouns out. She's not about that anymore. So, she's seen the tide moving away from that.
But I had so many like people on X and trans people I know who were in my life who, DM'd me. They were afraid to publicly defend me. They were like, we hate being at the forefront of these politics. We never, and a woman or a trans woman said, I'm transitioning. I don't want attention to my pronouns at work. I don't want to be in this position.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to talk about it at work or in public. Which is totally legit, but she felt like she couldn't say this.
Yep. Those people claim to speak for everybody, and they claim to speak for all marginalized, but
and then there were like,
you mentioned the immigrants. I had the same kind of thing with my dad, actually, kind of be all confused about how at work they sort of had to write down pronouns, and he was from Lebanon, and he was just totally confused. And it's like, yeah, a lot of immigrants are some of the most like non-woke people because this woke stuff is like a creation of very recent history. It's like
liberal
university
elites.
people.
Yeah, the PMC. Yeah.
Yeah.
So your dad spoke Arabic?
Yeah.
Speaks
and
Arabic?
French. And he speaks English too, but it's his third language.
Oh, wow. And what does he think about Zohran?
He's happy about Zohran, yeah, especially the anti-Israel stuff. Yeah.
And his wife. Oh, Zohran's wife is not Lebanese. She's Syrian.
She's Syrian.
Yeah. I feel like with AIPAC and the Israel situation, arming Israel and giving Israel that much money, to commit a genocide, that has been the great unmasking of liberalism and American imperialism. That has been the great unmasking. And the tide is turning against this, kind of enforced consensus that we have to we can't criticize Israel. We can't defend the Palestinians. I think the tide has really turned.
I certainly hope so, because there's a lot of annoying things in Liberalville, and New York is in many ways peak Liberalville. That's one reason why I want to see more people try to take Zoran as an inspiration, and try something in places that are in the less liberal areas. Because what I like is he didn't like punch the beehive, but
No, no,
he at least didn't become the beehive. Like, he didn't do the woke annoying stuff that everyone hates. One of those things that I think is associated with Liberalville is something you wouldn't associate with politics, but it very much is wrapped into politics, and it's trauma culture. You have a whole book devoted
coming
to it.
out.
It's
Yeah,
coming out in
yeah,
next year, right?
yeah. Yeah.
What's your beef with trauma, Catherine? What's your beef with trauma culture?
It's just a very, very big topic, but I don't. Okay, to make a long story short, I feel like the commodification of the trauma script has allowed liberals to fetishize vulnerability and therapy culture and self help to the detriment of political culture, number one. Number two, the emergence of trauma studies in academia was very, very much about an erasure of American imperialism in favor of one singular narrative that allowed for the, the most awful thing to have ever happened in the history of humanity to be the Holocaust, and the American victory in World War II to be the most redemptive thing in human history. There are a number of things that are incorrect politically about that, which was that the USSR and the US were united in defeating Nazism, number one. But number two, there was this idea that the kinds of suffering that was so extraordinary, the atrocities that were committed, would be forever enshrined as an untouchable issue that would define all forms of trauma for all people thereafter. So it erases everything that Great Britain has done to the Indian subcontinent. It erases the legacy of American imperialism, British imperialism, and just says this is the worst thing that's ever happened in humanity, and we are the best people in the world because we saved the Jews from the Nazis. So this was in academia, trauma studies was just making the Holocaust the most extraordinary event. And the Western world, the NATO nations, were the ones who had the power to heal people. This became this came on the heels of two different movements in PTSD with regard to Vietnam vets, and secondary, and the intense PTSD around survivors of sexual violence. And the ways in which trauma was imagined in these three different phases, from PTSD to surviving sexual violence to Holocaust studies, is that the survivor, number one, has a sanctified and sacred state. There is absolutely no context for violence. It is in the chamber of torture and horrors, and can be revisited and erased even through drugs, through tools, through therapy, and that we can just create these cures for something that is actually a part of human life. And there are a lot of people who are selling for a lot of money these different kinds of cures with regard to PTSD. And what it did for the Vietnam veterans was it was supposed to provide them with more help and treatment from the VA, from the Veterans Administration, which is a good thing. I don't think that, but the way that I go into the book, it's too much detail now, but the way in which this diagnosis was configured erased a lot of psychoanalytic questions about how the individual who's traumatized is in a way afflicted because the trauma destroys a part of your narcissism. In order to cope with it, you begin to identify with the perpetrator or identify with the powerful. So in one instance, in the whole question of PTSD, idea of lasting trauma that cannot be assimilated right away, that affects you without your control. Many of these studies were done on the basis of the case of a soldier who had been a witness to the civilian massacres in My Lai 4. My Lai 4 was a village in the Mekong Delta where that Charlie Company massacred. It was 3,000 civilians massacred in one day. Seymour Hersh did a real study on this and investigated everyone he investigated the returning soldiers, he investigated the commanding officers. In studies of PTSD, there is very, very little mention of the fact that the American soldiers who were returning from war had murdered large numbers of civilians in this context. The man who survived, who testified about it, who showed massive PTSD symptoms, he said he hadn't killed anyone. He was just terrified of what he had seen, and he knew that if he whistle blew in the United States, he thought he was going to be killed. So he felt endangered, and the whole guilt of that had been was a great burden upon him. In Robert J. Lifton's sort of spiritual guide called Home from the War about PTSD, he very much talks about how these soldiers returning from the war with these kinds of afflictions would become prophet survivors. And what they had seen, because it was in the maelstrom of kind of hell, was going to give them special insight and create an anti-war movement. The Vietnam vets against the war were always a tiny minority. And to put the burden of political revelation on people who had survived that kind of atrocity, without talking about their guilt, I think is really problematic politically and psychoanalytically, because it's I don't know if your listeners want to get into this so much, but trauma is something that cannot be extirpated or redeemed easily by any kind of formula. And what the PTSD diagnosis did was it created a checklist of symptoms. And people did not diagnose psychological illnesses this way until there was a huge reform of the DSM-3, and all of the mental illnesses now and disorders that we see now have checklists. That checklist, like if you show like hypervigilance, insomnia, violence, the checklisting of human mental disorders delivered mental illness to the psychopharmacological companies, because they could get FDA approval if they found a new drug that could cure like 6 out of the 10 symptoms. And then they would get approval. And we keep getting new drugs that can address new symptoms. And the symptoms keep changing each time they revise the DSM. So in many ways, like what was thought of as progress was a delivery of a very reified idea of mental disorder, depoliticized and completely made adaptable to drug regimes. Sorry, that was like a lot, but it's all in the book. It's going to be laid out. And there's the other aspect of this that I think is really important is that the rise of trauma studies in academia that then gave way to trauma culture in the liberal world happened in the 80s after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And when I was writing the book, a giant 800 to 900 page anthology called The Routledge Companion to Trauma Studies in Literature came out. And luckily, I got it on PDF, and I could search for economic crisis or class. And I swear to God, class appeared once, economic anxiety appeared another time, and there was nothing, zero, about the 2008 financial crisis.
So there's two key interesting themes here. One of guilt and of, instead of actually addressing the problems, sort of obfuscating the decay. I'm just out of curiosity. Have you read James Burnham's The Suicide of the West?
No.
Okay, I would say it's one of the most interesting right-wing books. He was a former
I believe
lefty.
it. No, I believe it.
Yeah.
His management, like managerial revolutions, really like influential, actually.
Yeah.
Me
Yeah, I know
thinking
you're
like
aware of
deep
the
sea. Yeah,
managerial
yeah.
revolution. The Suicide of the West is interesting because it's like a whole polemic against liberalism, and it's super relevant to this because there's 2 things that he's so there's a lot of things I don't agree with, like, for example, I don't really agree with his, like, defense of colonialism, but his critique of liberalism, he has, 2 powerful points. One is that is the idea of liberal guilt. Liberal guilt often drives liberals to an attempt to exonerate things very fast by creating ideologies that, rather than addressing decay or acknowledging it, they want to almost celebrate decay as progress or have cheap, quick solutions like changing words, having politically correct language. And I feel like therapy, I wouldn't say it's not like therapy like as a whole, but therapy ideology, therapism, some people have called it, right? Is sort of like an ideology of decay often, in that, by focusing everything on like one's own mental illness and one's own traumas, it totally depoliticizes things that are problems. And I think this runs deep even into like a lot of the way a lot of lefties think
Yeah,
about
oh yeah.
that.
So
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I wrote the trauma book was because I wanted to get to the bottom of identity politics without like just attacking its symptoms. Like, where does this actually come from? And wokeness as well. Like, I don't like to use the term woke because nobody says, "Oh, I'm woke." It's like a right wing accusation. The term "stay woke" has not been used positively in a long time. So I just wanted to look at how we got here and into this state of being so antisocial and so ill-equipped to deal with other people on the less liberal side of things. And how did we get how did we become so eager to embrace diagnoses for anything that would seem to disturb the most fragile kind of equilibrium? We go, if I'm shy, I have social anxiety, I've got to take, an anti-anxiety pill. I'm really like sad that my boyfriend left me, so I have borderline personality disorder. It's like there's so much, like, especially for women, this absolute radical embrace of very reified forms of mental disorder I see all around me all the time, especially in the professional managerial class, because we think that they're always like some kind of weird technologically attuned solution so that we can keep tuning ourselves to optimize ourselves. And we stop understanding ourselves as beings with with deep unconscious tendencies, deep fantasies, desires that may not be socially acceptable, that we have to negotiate with each other. And we have a kind of religion of survivorship without forgiveness. It's a religion that is guilt, but without forgiveness.
And without God or the Father.
No,
That's another story.
without communion. It's all about correction and no communion.
They love to say the solution to everything is to affirm. You just need to affirm how people feel, and then the doctor will figure out what's best, and the doctor will prescribe them some pill or whatever. And that's
It was
apparent
just there was just
progressive.
a New York Times op-ed written by a psychoanalyst. I don't know where he got his training, but it was all about feelings and smartphones, and our feelings are addicted, and we're so like we're able to feel grief, and you know what? Feelings are illusions. Feelings we should mistrust. We should embody them. We should be able to look at them. But if we just stay all at the level of feeling, we're regressive. Like we have to be able to live with our feelings and each other, but we can't just think that having feelings is enough. Being sad is not enough. And I guess it's devastating to say that, because I think that we have to work through our feelings to get to something else, which is a social, maybe objective psychoanalytic truth about our fantasies of the other, of politics, of the social field. Because we live with deep unconscious fantasies about what we think satisfaction should look like, fulfillment should look like, the revolution should look like. And those fantasies are often extremely unflattering.
You said therapy culture is deeply depoliticizing. Do you think that there's
It's
something?
antisocial. I don't
Yeah.
even think I think like
Well,
we're all so antisocial, we're not even really ready to be political subjects right now.
no, politics literally entails, like a polis, which means talking to people and socializing. So how can you have politics without socializing? With the depoliticizing effect, though, I mean, one thing I find really striking is so many people will just say uncritically that the reason for the rapid rise of mental illness is just that we have like destigmatization, that people feel open and free to express themselves, and we just need to deal with it. And also this therapy speak, it's especially in my generation, a lot of people complain about it because it's very prevalent, this therapy speak where everything is to be fixed with communication, but also this I don't know how to else explain it, but this, emphasis on needs and wants. Something feels very deeply capitalistic about it all.
What you mean intersubjectively? Yeah, I feel like there's this like fantasy that if you express your feelings, you're doing something good. So, and sometimes like you shouldn't. You should keep your feelings to yourself, first of all. And that's not a bad thing to be able to do that. And like I said before, there isn't this like free intersubjective feeling. And the other is not just a mirror there to recognize your feelings. Like you are participating in a system that produces either like recognition, playfulness, creativity, love, desire, or is it just not you monadically going, I have feelings, please recognize all my feelings. It's like you're in a system. I don't know how to even, what you would do with someone who's completely therapeutized in a relationship. It would be like, I need this, you need that. I'm having this feeling, you don't see me. Like everything is like some kind of weird exchange, transactional exchange to extract recognition from the other. And, I came from a very, very abusive family. And there were all these ways in which my experience, my subjectivity was demolished physically and psychologically, existentially. But like staying just with that feeling of being erased is not enough. Like I had to see this thing through for myself in different systems and how I lived my life, my fantasy of what my role was in all of this stuff. And it's a terrible, like long road to hoe to go on. But I think that psychoanalysis is the only means of reaching that kind of insight about one's own fantasies. And there's no unconscious in all the therapy talk for your generations. Like everything is just about what's inside of me needs to be outside so you can see it and then you can acknowledge it. And that means I'm having a good relationship. And a lot of it came out of also like second wave feminism and all of this stuff, which is actually non-interactional. There's something like so non-interactional about the demand, the constant demand to be recognized in the most infantilizing ways. If you don't get that at an early age, it's incredibly damaging. But we're adults now.
Yeah, I think the listeners of this show will really like the book The Culture of Narcissism by Christopher Lasch. I'm very inspired by Lasch in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
The topic of
Lasch was a brutal critic of the left liberal countercultural turn. Yeah. Brutal.
in our last podcast, you had talked a little bit about second wave feminism. That's something I'm curious for you to actually elaborate on. You have an interesting critique of second wave feminism as a more capitalist phenomenon.
No, I'm so mad at feminism right now these days. But I'll just call it like the newest iterations have been for your generation, like girl boss feminism, PMC feminism, lean in feminism. This is what you've all grown up with, this kind of like empowerment of women through these like really corporate neoliberal channels. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, since I've talked to you, like in my refinement of these ideas, is that PMC feminism wants women to be able to compete with men for the highest jobs in the white collar world. Socialist feminism wanted, and this is why like all the second wave feminists hated the socialist feminists, because they wanted to work within their unions to get better pay, better accommodations for their families, better wages, better childcare, better benefits. And the great break, this is during the research that I did on the book, was like, why did this tendency of feminism, PMC feminism, become so dominant? And because there was a long tradition of women who were communists, who were union members, who were agitators, the most famous ones being Rosa Luxemburg and Emma Goldman. But there was a Canadian-American woman named Myra Wolfgang, who was called the Battling Belle of Detroit. And she organized service workers, interracial unions. She organized wildcat strikes, sit-down strikes. And she was apprenticed to union leaders, like really tough guys in Detroit. And she actually got her daughter to go undercover as a playgirl in the Playboy Mansion to expose like working conditions, to try to organize the Playboy bunnies at the Hugh Hefner Mansion. But the second wave feminists like Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, who was paid by the CIA, they hated these women. The
Wait, really?
socialist feminists. There's a lot of documentation that she was, and she sued a biographer who was going to expose this, and none of this has come out. But I think it's going to come out eventually.
Wow.
Anyway, so a lot of the women who are on the left were really destroyed by the McCarthy anti-communist movements. But Myra Wolfgang continued to work as a feminist labor union organizer. And one of the big breaks between socialist feminism and PMC feminism was that the sort of union feminists, the working class feminists, did not support the Equal Rights Amendment, which was eventually defeated in the government. And the PMC feminists really wanted that. And they wanted that to have the equal playing field, because women could do everything men could do at work. But for these blue collar feminists, they were like, we don't want to have the job expectations of women, if this physically dangerous jobs, be the same as men's, because women have different capacities. And we want to work with men, but we're different. And I think it was in 1970, the Rutgers Women's Studies Department organized a big feminist conference where Betty Friedan, the author of The Feminine Mystique, which was the great Bible of suburban feminists, and Myra Wolfgang were supposed to debate each other. And Betty Friedan called Myra Wolfgang an Aunt Tom for wanting to work with men to further working class men's rights. I'm talking about fighting for women's rights after you get the women's rights at work, after you get the vote, and then what comes next? Abortion rights, what are the rights that are important to PMC feminists? What are the rights that are important to socialist feminists, right? Mm-hmm. And they were very different. One was much more normy, one was more about competition and sex, and the other one was about work and work conditions. Today, the rising misogyny online, the incel culture, that is not necessarily a feminist preoccupation. That's a social problem. This is saying we can solve racism, we can solve racism by just making, extirpating racism from every white person. No, we want to create structures of equality so that you are punished if you're a racist. And if you are not white, you are supported like all of your working class brothers and sisters, in fact, the same way. And you know what? If you're a fucking racist, you just get marginalized in the society. You get, you get what you are not welcome to express your beliefs to the polis. I'm not a free speech absolutist, but the misogyny of young men, that's like a whole other thing that's not necessarily like included in my view of what happened with feminism. The thing that the young men have done today is they've become reactionaries with regard to what they think of as feminist liberal hegemony. And it may or may not be true, but in certain liberal institutions that are dominated by women, like universities, high schools, etc., like the liberal professions, women have to, and then ethos of women has dominated those institutions for the past 15, 20, 30 years or so. That is a reality. And so young men becoming misogynist incels in this environment are just being reactionary dumbasses because they don't actually want to do the work of figuring out who is really oppressing them. It's not women, it's capitalism. Their lack of dignity as men is because of exploitation and the lack of a future of dignified work that's given to working class people and working class men especially. If you're going to blame women for them, I'm just like, you're an idiot. What harm can you do to women at that point? You can become really violent. You can become antisocial. It's terrifying, actually, what acting out can provide. But it's like the objects of your resentment within, a democratic society are completely distorted. And it serves capitalism to have you misidentify the enemy, to misidentify your enemy. If your enemy is women, sorry.
Yeah, it's obviously stupid. And a lot of the liberal culture today seems to think the solution to this sort of gender war and the male whatever epidemic is like for men to just express their feelings more, to be more open and less
More
repressed and
feminized, more
vulnerable. Yeah, yeah, because that seemed to be the message, honestly. Did you see that new Adolescence
I
show?
did, I
Or
did,
yeah,
I
on
did.
Netflix?
Actually, like the father, I forget the name of that actor, was the one who created the series, and he had heard about incel culture, and he's a very loving dad, and he said, he was thinking about like his own father, his working class milieu, where men couldn't be affectionate with their sons, and he thought he would make a drama about that. So it wasn't just about the kid, it was about the father, really, about the father's inability to express anything close to affection. Like, I think you didn't like it, my son didn't like it. Like, I think it was made for people of our generation, like older people, because parents, because I was like, God, this is so cool. As it was to my son. It's
Yeah.
like, I hated that show. It's like, why? It's
Yes.
so real. And
It's good acting.
it was such good act.
But it's like I feel like it's just not really the problem in today's society. Like, if anything, we have like too much liberal parenting. In my opinion, honestly, it's
Right,
like it's,
right.
well,
Too
it's I
much
didn't
touchy, no boundaries.
I used to not think that, but then it's like I meet people with liberal parent who grew up with liberal parenting or just lack of parenting, period,
That's right.
and which is worse.
But in a
And
way, the
and
film is
it's like
about
I think
just
a lot of
these.
this like shooting, it's mental illness. It's not a matter of whether the dad was like not soft enough or whether the kid is not vulnerable enough. It's like there's just a rise in mental illness, I feel like,
I feel like there's like a general social collapse. I really do.
causing the mental illness.
I don't even want to call it mental illness. It's like general social collapse. Like there are no boundaries, and there's
Mm.
like access to guns and violence, and there are no norms. No one wants to make the effort to set norms, set boundaries, to create expectations, to yell at a kid when they're doing something wrong. I mean, you feel like, okay, that's abusing them, and they're deprived, and then we have to like, there's a lot of coddling, but there's no investment in continuity, traditions, roles, things like that have to do with like strength or sacrifice or things like that. We gave all of that to the right.
If you have been enjoying this episode so far, you can listen to the second half of it in the back room on Patreon. Catherine Liu and I go over all kind of very interesting stuff, and it was very entertaining, very enjoyable. For those who are new to the show, All of the second halves of all of One Dime Radio episodes are on Patreon in an exclusive podcast called The Backroom. This is how the show stays running. At this point, you get access to over 80 exclusive podcast episodes, and you get to be part of the One Dime Radio Discord. And by doing so, you are supporting not just the podcast, but the main channel that I do. Leave a like and a comment and share with your friends. See you there.
My only hope is that when enough people become pessimists, then out of despair somebody maybe does something. But you know why I also like to be a pessimist? Because it's the only way to have a nice life. If you're an optimist, then always bad things happen and you are always disappointed. When you are a pessimist, then you look around, okay, there are bad, but from time to time something nice happens and you are, as a pessimist, you are a little bit glad all the time, no?
You are listening to One Dime Radio. Become a patron at patreon.com/onedime to support the show and get access to extra content.